Hi, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Apps Events Virtual Google Admin Enterprise Summit. That is an absolute mouthful. Well, we welcome to this summit, of course, Charlie Love and Peter Horner. Charlie Love, you know, of course, from many live streams before. Peter Horner is prolific on Twitter for sharing out amazing admin tips. This summit is sponsored by Acer, and of course, Apps Events is a Google PD partner. We have been a Google PD partner for, in fact, over 9 years now. It's been going on quite a long time. Today, we're here to talk to you about groups in GAM. Perhaps not the most exciting title, Charlie, I have to say, but a very, very important, a really important topic. Do you want it like a 1-2 sentence teaser? What have we got coming up, Charlie?
So you can't blame me for the title. The title has come from the community. So these are questions that we've had either through the YouTube channel or from schools that have been interested in other partners who've wanted to know a little bit more about groups and particularly using GAM to manage those groups. So that's going to come from feedback from folks watching these sessions. So that's why it's there. And what it's about today is just that, what can you do to manage your groups in a straightforward way as an admin from the command line. And we'll probably just touch on a little bit of best practice and a few ideas around how you might use Google Groups as well.
Fantastic. And just to mention again, we are, of course, being sponsored by Acer for these events. If you want to get any more information about Acer's new Chromebooks, and in fact, there's some very exciting Chromebooks just launched recently. Do get in contact with Acer. Their Twitter handle is there, their email address as well. Some big, exciting things come to Chromebooks, I believe, in the next couple of months, but I don't think we can talk any more about that yet. We, in addition to being a PD partner, we are also an enterprise partner. What that means is we support schools with Education Plus. Education Plus is the paid version of Google for Education. So we have different versions. Education Fundamentals, which everybody is very familiar with, and Education Plus brings a lot of premium features to Google. For example, there's breakout rooms, Google Meet recordings, and a whole host of admin features. Okay, unfortunately, Veronica is here. I just want to bring in Veronica. Welcome back, Veronica. Just in time to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As James already mentioned, we are live. We are a Google partner. We are really pleased you are joining our summit. Hi, Peter. Hi, Charlie. I would like to really say huge thanks to Peter and to Charlie because they are going to be our hosts, our guests, and they are going to present their session. Also, thanks to James because he was able to start our summit. James is my amazing colleague. So, and it has been a pleasure to be working with James for years.
Yeah.
So, yes,
many years now, Veronica.
Over 6, James. Over 6. And I am still 21. Yeah, so I'm based in the Czech Republic. I am responsible for European events. So please feel free to contact me if you have any requests, any questions. We are more than happy to connect with you and to organize any events, any training, anything customized. Really feel free to contact us. And I am looking forward to listening your presentation, Charlie, and also the roundtable with you all. So thank you so much.
Shall we do a proper intro, just in case you haven't seen Charlie before? Charlie Love, please, quick intro from you.
Grand. So I'm Charlie Love. I'm a Google certified admin and educator. My background is supporting schools and local authorities and districts to make the best of Google Workspace. And I've been working with Google Workspace for probably over 10 years, just about now, as an administrator.
Thank you, Charlie, and welcome, Peter. I think this is your first time on the Admin Summit. Is that right, Peter?
It is. It's my first one. Yeah. So thank you for the for warm welcome. Yeah. So So I'm a Google trainer, certified trainer and innovator. I'm currently an IT manager and lead on digital learning at a big sixth form college in the south of England. And I've worked with Google Workspace a similar amount of time as Charlie, actually. So almost 10 years, not quite 10.
And a bit of a shameless plug, we've actually been working with Peter's school recently on a Google Admin Security Health Check. That's a little bit of a plug for that. There's a new service that Google is launching, which goes into a domain and looks at basically every setting on a school's domain. And we compare that against best practice. We look for perhaps suspended users that need to be moved on and perhaps deleted. We look for any security threats on the domain, the whole host of things we've been working with Peter on his school's domain. And I think maybe in a week or two, Peter, perhaps we can do a live stream specifically about that, talking about how the whole process looks from you as a customer.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a super useful process. I mean, I thought I had everything set up perfectly, but it's highlighted some things I can even improve on and taught me a thing or two. So yeah, it's a really useful process I could recommend.
And actually, yeah, Peter truly is another fantastic expert. So he did have everything set up perfectly well. But beyond that, because Google, of course, Google Workspace is such a big product now, there's a lot of things we can look at. But anyway, let's get on to this evening's or this afternoon's topic. And we have a few discussion points here, I think, Charlie. So Charlie, do you want to lead off with these?
Yeah, so I suppose this is really these are just a flavor of some of the things that we'll touch on in this session. Now, there's no way in the time we've got available, we can go into lots of detail about all these things, but we'll maybe just highlight a couple of ideas, things for you to think about, and maybe point you in some directions around some of these features, some of these tools that you might be able to use, commands you might be able to use with GAM, for example, or what you might be able to do with Google Groups in general. So that's kind of the flavor of what we're going to do. And I suppose we're going to start that off with a bit of a discussion, I think, probably around what we can do with groups.
Can I start first? Can I do the easy one?
You can do the easy one.
Mailing list. What can you do with groups? Mailing list. The most basic, in fact, when Google first launched with groups many years ago, it was quite simply a mailing list. A collection of emails together, and you could email the group and everybody received that email. Probably the most popular use of groups, certainly initially, but that has changed considerably since then. So maybe Peter or Charlie, you could give us some of those advanced uses.
Yeah, sure. So we've got about 4,500 students at our college, and we've got thousands of groups. We create groups for classes, courses, departments for staff. So of course we're using mailing lists. One of the other things we use groups for is, so GAM has this cool function where you can create classrooms, but we actually use the GAM command to sync that classroom with a group. So the cool thing about that is it means we only need to keep that group up to date. Then we just tell all of our classrooms to sync against those groups. That's a slightly more advanced use. Have you done that, Charlie?
Yeah, I have done that, and you're still in one of mine, so that's great. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's a great use of the tool, that you can keep the group, maintain the group, and then the group just updates your classroom. So yeah, that whole roster sync thing is great, is really useful. So one of the things I really like we can do with groups now, that you can do with GAM, which was sync organizational units from your admin hierarchy in Google Workspace and sync those through to a specific group. And you can do that both from one level in your admin hierarchy. So if you have a folder of users called teachers, you could sync that through to a group called teachers. But if you had subfolders within that, so you had sub-OUs of that teachers, you can either choose to sync those sub-OUs or not sync those sub-OUs. So you've got some flexibility there. And what's great about the new relatively new dynamic groups is you can now also do that in the admin console as well, whereas previously you couldn't. So I suppose that's one of the things you can do with groups. It's great. Link them to your organizational units and sync that way. I've got another one, which is a bit of maybe just a kind of ad hoc one, which is you can actually use, if you create web apps and you're looking to only authenticate certain users to use that particular web app, you can actually use a group membership to check that group membership to see as part of your authentication workflow into that web app. So you could say, are these people in this group? Is someone signing in? Are they signed into that? Are they part of that group? And then that group is part of your authentication workflow for that web app.
Yeah, that's a good one. I've not actually used that before, because you can set up quite a few web apps on the admin console now and have Google as your single sign-on source. So yeah. Another one I want to throw in actually is application assignment on groups. So we do this in a couple of different ways. So for some of our groups, we might have an app like Soundtrap we want to give out to just our media students. So what we can do there is just assign that one app and that licenses which go with that app to that media group. And in some cases, we've also started setting up a group for each application. So then if it isn't like a class-based app, we can say, well, any of these, this random assignment of users, we can just drop them into a group and they get the app we want them to show up. So good example of that is we just recently got Parallels to allow us to run Windows on our Chromebooks. So we've set up a Parallels group and have put in the chosen staff who get access to that in that group, and it just pops up on their Chromebook seamlessly.
Actually, I'm going to jump in there, Peter, because that's the one I wanted to hear more about, is this idea of service or app enablement. Because there's actually a whole host of services now that can be enabled through groups. And from what I understand, the real benefit of that is, of course, you can deploy settings, deploy sharing settings or apps, call services, without disrupting your organizational structure, which is really great. So you've got your organizational structure already set up, and then as you just mentioned there, Parallels, for example, can be deployed just via groups. You set up a group, give it access to that. Charlie, have you got anything else to mention about that service enablement side?
I think just what you mentioned there, James, the fact that you've got that really straightforward mechanism to assign your services just through the group. The way that we've kind of done that is used groups and created those groups kind of as a one-off from using the sync tool in GAM. So we create the group, for example, teachers, and then we'll sync into that, and then we can add and remove people ad hoc as we go along. But just the principle's the same. You're just using that to access the particular service.
And it's also good for turning off services. It's one example how we've used it. So we have two-step verification on for everyone in our staff organizational unit, but there's one or two accounts in there where we don't want it turned on for everyone and enforced for everyone. So we can just put an exception for those group members. Okay, these guys don't have to do two-step verification. That's okay, we've allowed it for you, but everyone else, you do have to. So you can do the kind of inverse of removing settings you don't want to apply to particular people.
Grand. So do you want to move on to our next item? Okay, so what I was going to suggest here, folks, is just to share a little bit about, you've heard us speak about GAM, and you might be sitting there wondering, what is this thing that folks are talking about? What are we, what is that application that we're mentioning? So GAM is a tool that's linked to using the APIs for managing Google Workspace. And what it allows administrators to do is to manage that workspace from the command line. And many administrators, if they're coming from a kind of legacy Microsoft environment, will be familiar with things like PowerShell. Peter, I don't know what's your experience with kind of that about using GAM and where you've come from in your kind of journey to get to use it.
Yeah, so I've never been a Microsofty person. I've always been into Linux. So GAM, yeah, it was really easy to kind of get into that for me because I've always been very used to using like the Linux shell. Yeah, so that's kind of where I started using it. Started off with a basic version, but now, of course, default to GAM Advanced. which is definitely the best version to use. Wouldn't you agree, Charlie?
Yeah, I switch between them. I'll be honest. Sometimes I'm not, because what they're always in development, and they're always in different states of development. And sometimes new features come into the kind of the base level one GAM, and then they get forked off in GitHub and into the advanced. And so, yeah, I tend to switch between things depending, I'll try it out for a bit of time and then see. So I'm kind of a mixture, I'll be honest. So, I mean, I think that journey around command line, if you're coming from that legacy Windows environment, then you kind of have that access to PowerShell and be able to do a whole host of admin commands from that command line. And in order to do the similar types of things and to script kind of common sets of commands, that's why you would move and use GAM. And what a great way to use GAM, it runs on everything. So it runs on Linux, it runs on Mac, it runs on Windows machines, and it will also run great in the Chromebook, particularly and it'll run in the Linux container on a Chromebook really well. So if you have access to GAM, that's great as being an admin. But what's a really great way to run it is to actually run GAM in the cloud, because we're talking about Google technologies, we're talking about embracing the cloud. And admins, quite a few admins still don't know this, is that your users get a free cloud shell. No cost to it, all part of the services available from Google. And you actually get a chance, if you go to cloud.google.com, if you go to console.cloud.google.com, and James, if we just switch across to the other screen there. Yeah. So here, folks, I've just gone to console.cloud.google.com. And this is your kind of landing page when you go to your cloud console here. And up in the top corner, you get the option to launch a Cloud Shell, which I've just got running here. And I've actually opened it up in another window. And this is just Cloud Shell giving me access to a command prompt and that shell running in the cloud. And I've actually just installed GAM. I followed the instructions on the GAM wiki, and we've got some links to that later on. And I have GAM available here on a demo domain. So if I can just do a quick GAM command, and I can get information about that domain. It'll come through in a second or two. Grand. So that's GAM, and it's installed in a Cloud Shell that I can use. So what's really great about this is that you can then access that Cloud Shell. As long as you've got a browser, you can access this shell from any device using that browser and use it as you need to manage your domain. So it's a really quick way to get in and use GAM and to use it on the go. So you don't have to go to a specific device. You can just use it in the cloud straight away.
One thing I will just comment, Charlie, I remember using GAM perhaps up to 6 years ago. I forget when it was released. I don't know how old it is now. I should have looked that up. But I remember initially installing GAM, and you had to go through several different processes and running scripts and enabling permissions manually. But it's actually very straightforward now, isn't it? What is the process, whether you're doing it on your Mac or in Cloud Shell, how much technical knowledge do you think you need to install it, Charlie?
Compared to what you used to, very little now. The actual, it takes you step by step through the installation now. So as long as you're patient and read what comes up on the screen and click on the links and follow through as it says, it will probably take you, 10 to 15 minutes, maybe, Peter?
I'd say even less than that. Yeah. It's definitely super easy now compared to what it used to be. You're right. And you just need to follow through the prompts, read things carefully. Don't be scared of it just because there's a lot of writing. It's a pretty reliable process. I've had some people run through it the other day, setting it up on the Cloud Shell, and works perfectly every time.
Yeah. So it's a really straightforward process.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago, you had to go to each permission individually and enable them. And it took ages. Probably took an hour, maybe, to do it all.
Yeah, it certainly easy took an hour to do. I remember doing it, and it was a painful process. But now,
what I would say there, for kind of larger schools or colleges where you've got several super admins, is try to set it up so that you all share the same GAM project on GCP. So you're not kind of replicating those settings again and again as each admin sets that up. You just need to copy out some of the files in the GAM configuration directory, which will kind of keep your cloud console a little bit neater and a bit easier to manage.
That's a really good idea, Peter. That's the client JSON file I think you need to copy, is it?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So there's just a file that's in the installation. If you copy that across and authorize that, you should have the same settings, I think.
Top tip. And in fact, actually, I'm gonna give out one little tip here, just for those admins who are a little bit newer to managing Google in your domain. GAM really does give you quite literally superpowers on your domain. There's a lot you can do with very, very few clicks. So just be aware of that when you're running commands. Maybe if you've got access to a training domain, that's a great way to practice using GAM, or a sandbox domain. That'd be a great place to start if you're very new to it. Other than that, when you do delete something in GAM, when you delete a user in GAM or you're deleting a group, it can be devastating for your domain. I do know of a school where somebody deleted all the Google Classrooms using GAM just before the start of the new year. Deleted rather than archived. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, actually, with great power comes great responsibility. Kind of Spider-Man quote always kind of rings in my head every time I'm about to run a big command on GAM. Definitely try it out just a few users first.
Yeah, absolutely. I must be years and years ago, right at the very start of my Google admin journey, I had one of those experiences where again, using GAM, I reset an entire year group's password without meaning to. So yeah, be careful, folks. Check what you're doing. Read up on the wiki. Look at the instruction examples, and you'll be fine. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, shall we have a little look at on the slide deck and just see some of the things that we can do with GAM, and maybe just talk through some of the features we've got available there. So I just mentioned, what is GAM, and the great thing is we were talking about installing it in the cloud, and we actually have a video that I've done on just that. It's in the Apps Events channel, and the link to that video is there in the deck, and we'll maybe see if we can drop that into...
Actually, I dropped the link in the chat already. It is there in the chat.
Perfect. Super.
I've used that video. It's very useful to share with people. So thanks for that, Charlie.
Brilliant. You're very welcome. And it's just that one of those things, you see somebody doing it, it just helps you helps you do the same job yourself. So that's grand. And one of the things we're going to just touch on, I suppose, just talking about what you can do with GAM. So you can do just about anything to manage your domain. And in fact, there are some things that you can do with GAM that you can't easily do with the admin console. So for example, I think delegated access to mail is a user-led task as an application. So if users want to delegate their mail access, an admin can't really do that. But if you have GAM, an admin can actually set up delegated mail access for users, which is just a useful tip. So we talk about groups particularly, and we'll talk about groups with GAM. I suppose it's what we can do in terms of managing those groups and some of those group settings. And I thought I'd throw in here just some examples of group settings or group commands that might be of help to folks. So the first one was about creating a group. So you can just create a group from the command line, say GAM create group, and then you put in the group information, description and such. So that's kind of really straightforward way to create a group. A real great tip is that second one that's on the page there, which is about who can leave a group. And I don't know, for users that are in an education setting particularly, you probably don't want your students coming out of groups because you're using those groups for a particular purpose. And if you set up a group and say using GAM, you can say GAM update group, whatever the group name is, and you can say who can leave it, and you can say the managers can leave it. Now, if you say that the managers can leave it, it means that the regular members of that group can't go anywhere, and they're tied in and locked into that group. So they can't leave it and get out, which is a really useful tip.
I really like that sentence. You can mirror it on Google Classroom now as well, so you can stop people leaving classes. And yeah, it's good to have that on, then you can stop students leaving groups. Yeah.
Or teachers. Maybe stop teachers leaving groups as well.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely.
Possibly.
You want to just wherever you need to manage that membership because you have a legitimate reason to keep people in that group for whatever purpose. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the great things that GAM lets you do is this kind of add users from anywhere and sync users with pretty much anything that you've got set up. So how many of these things, Peter, are you kind of actively doing at the moment around syncing and such?
Yeah, so most of our groups, we sync from our local directory using Google Cloud Directory Sync, but I do use GAM a lot for creating kind of ad hoc groups. Like I've just set up some because we're running some exams on Chromebooks and I wanted to create some exam user accounts on Google and group those up to assign particular settings to them. So for that, I just use the CSV file. And what's really useful on the Google Cloud Shell is you've got a little menu where you can upload CSVs to that and use that with GAM. So yeah, use CSVs. Also, just being able to kind of use GAM to search for users with a particular field out and using a query function, and then passing that information over to GAM to add those users into a particular group. That's also kind of useful for, I guess, almost replicating the dynamic groups, which are now in Whitespace anyway, but you could do that with GAM, couldn't you?
Yeah. So that is a really good point around, syncing those groups and the dynamic nature of them, and you can do that kind of thing now. You could do that with GAM previously. One of the things that we do is that having groups within groups, so that from GAM, what you can do is you can add a group email address. You've got two options when you add a group to another group, and with GAM, so those two options are you can add users into a group because they're a member of another group. So that's actually adding the actual user in. So if you add group members, that will add those users. Their individual email addresses will go into your new group. But if you add just the group, it then just emails the group membership rather than adding the individual users. I hope that I'm not sure if I explained that properly, but hopefully that came across okay. That you can sync both a group membership to another group, or you can just add the group and those users in that group will be just emailed as part of that group. And the other one that we use a lot is the organization unit and children, which is that kind of dynamic syncing that we've spoken about already. So just in terms of looking at a few commands that you might be able to use around using GAM, and again, this is just some examples just to show folks how quickly and easily you can add users to your groups. You just say the GAM update group, put in the group name, and then you can add a manager. You can specify what sort of notifications they get from the group, whether they're getting all email or whether they're getting a digest, or you can say no mail as well. And you can add a particular user. Similarly, you can add members to the group. And this is the thing I was talking about previously, which is adding members of another group as members. So you can add that with the GAM update group, and then you say add group, and that adds those members. Or you got to add another group as a member. So that's a bit of a distinction there between how you can add users into the groups, which is really kind of useful. And this one is a lifesaver. This is the syncing that we've been speaking about. So when you're syncing users, it's just an example of how you can sync those to a particular OU. Notice you have the OU path there inside quotes. So we've done sync OU GAM update group, whatever the group name is, sync, and then we've put the OU path inside quotes, which just to show you that that's how you can lay it out. The first one there, the top one, will only sync users at that level. So it won't pay any attention to any of the sub-OUs. None of those sub-OU members would be added. But the second one, where it says OU and children, will sync all of the members of that OU and any sub-OUs that you've got. So they'll all be synced through. And the sort of little note we put on there, you can now do this with dynamic groups. So James, you have did a bit of a discussion on YouTube about dynamic groups a little while ago, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. Was that with you or with Dan? I forget. But yeah, dynamic groups. It's a great feature. It simplifies the populating the membership of groups because now you can actually use different profile fields to automate membership of a group. For example, if a teacher on their profile has a custom field called teacher, then you could create a group called teachers, and every user that has that custom field tagged as teacher would automatically become a member of that dynamic group.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at if you go into the admin console and you go to your users and groups, and when you click into groups, you'll see up at the top of the list in the admin console, you have the option to create dynamic groups. And you're going to have a look at that as an admin, because you'll find a whole array, as James is saying, a whole array of different fields that you can use to base your group membership on, including custom schemas and things that you add in yourself. So really, really exciting development for admins just to make the most of that group functionality.
Just make sure your information is good and consistent. We sometimes run into issues where, say that you're making a dynamic group based on department, make sure that department's named the same throughout, otherwise that won't work. So yeah, good information is important.
Yeah, quality of it is really, really vital. That yeah, I've run into that. I'm sure most admins will have run into data quality issues, so we call them. So as when you set up and manage your OUs, yeah, absolutely right, Peter. One of the things I often find myself having to do is dump a whole load of user information into a file or into a sheet for whatever purpose, whether it's to create an analytics dashboard, whether it's to update some other system that we're using. I often find that I need to get large amounts of data out of the admin console and potentially sometimes out of groups to use for other purposes. And so you can do that. You can print out your group memberships. You can either print them out to a CSV file. So you can just pipe them through to a CSV, which is what I've got there in the first command. So I just go into Cloud Shell, use GAM, I do GAM print group members group, and then whichever group it is. And I've just used the symbol there to put me through to members.csv. And then you can download that members CSV file from your Cloud Shell editor. And the other option there is where you can just route the data straight through to a sheet in Google Drive. So that's really useful. And also with GAM, and Peter, I think you mentioned this, maybe I missed this, but I think you maybe mentioned using GAM to get class lists and such. Is that something that you guys do?
Yeah. So we create our Google Classrooms and then just tell GAM to sync those against the group. So we're just pulling those members, a bit like you were earlier with putting people from the OU to add into a group, but we're using the group to add people into the class, and that's using the sync command. And the nice thing about that is you just need to update your groups. You don't need to worry about updating your classes as well. Just run that GAM command on your classes every so often, and it will keep your classes up to date. In terms of printing group settings, something which is really useful, which came up in our security audit the other week, was running GAM print groups settings to Drive. And rather than just putting out the members, that pulls out all the group visibility settings on your domain. So then you can quickly identify any groups which might be shared externally, which you might not want those to be. So that is a really useful command for just kind of doing a quick audit on group sharing settings.
Yeah, that's useful. I probably need to run that on my own domain. I think just to have another look at that as well. I haven't done that for quite a while now, so I think that's probably something that I probably need to have a little look at for sure. It's good. That's a good tip, that one. So I was thinking just about where we could point folks if they wanted to know a little bit more about using GAM, about using groups, and and get maybe just a bit more admin support. And just up there, I've got, and James has already shared that into the chat as well. We've got linked through to the GAM wiki. That is my hottest bookmark I have on my computer. That is the one I use all the time. Going into the GAM wiki and looking at the commands that are running there and how they're put together and how I use them. I'm on that every day, and just to look at the commands that I'm using and just to check what I'm doing. So I use that all the time. And we've also got a whole load of videos on using GAM, installing GAM, using GAM to manage Chrome OS devices, printout devices, whole host of different uses of GAM, and admin and the admin console directly as well. And that's available on our Apps Events YouTube channel. And that link there will take you through to the admin playlist for 2021. And more videos have been uploaded as well from that. James, do you want to say anything about just the kind of admin stuff that we've been doing on YouTube in general?
Yes, thank you, Charlie, for putting me on the spot on that one. Let me just take a moment. Yeah, absolutely. So we do, well, Charlie hosts these admin summits very regularly. And in addition to that, we have tips and tricks videos on admin as well, which are coming out frequently on the channel. Very, very useful for schools. And it's really great if you're considering perhaps an upgrade to Education Plus, or you just want to learn how to use GAM, for example. It's a great place to begin. Charlie is the absolute expert for presenting this stuff.
That's very kind of you. Thank you very much. I'm a bit embarrassed now, but anyway, I'll move on.
I always have to bring it down to my level before I speak to Charlie. I always have to prepare myself before speaking to Charlie about admin.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, I mean, it's been really exciting to do the kind of admin stuff that we've been doing, and lots of ideas of how we're going to develop that going forward. But please, if you've got ideas, things you would like to see, things you want to find out more about, questions you've got about the admin console or about admin in general, or using Google Cloud and leveraging the power of the cloud in your particular enterprise or school, ask those questions, put them into the chat. Add them to the comments in the YouTube channel, and we'll do our very best to pull some of that content together to answer those questions that we might get. Grand. So I think what we want to do is maybe just see if there's any further questions coming through from folks. If you've had anything else in the comments that we've had as we've been going along, or if any of the panel have got any ideas or difficult questions or just thoughts that we might want to share at this point.
One thing I'd chuck out there, which I think is a good thing for kind of admins to check on the admin console, is their default group sharing settings. I recommend setting that to group members only, rather than where the levels above that would be the entire organization or anyone on the internet. So that's just a good way of, by default, kind of keeping your groups just a bit more private and controlled in terms of who can actually see those and interact with those members on the group.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you're in an education setting, you're absolutely, well, my recommendation is don't enable students to create groups. Because that by default, that'll be on for students. So what you want to make sure is when you're looking at your setting up your OUs and the permissions you've got, turn off group creation for your students, unless you have a really good reason, a strong reason to do so. So, for example, if you've got a group of students who are working on a particular project, you might allow them to create a group for that project, or you might create the group for them and then just add them. That probably my recommendation is just create the group on demand. Okay, Grad, let's just chat about that. So other than groups, where can GAM be applied? So GAM has access to pretty much all of the settings that you've got within your admin console. And you can apply, as you've heard from Peter, apply GAM to Google Classroom. You can apply GAM and use GAM for managing your users, for managing your settings, for managing your Chrome OS devices. Is there anything I've missed there, guys?
Chrome OS, that's a great one. We use GAM to automatically deprovision and power wash large numbers of Chromebooks just using GAM. And James sent me a really useful GAM command the other day, which prints out all of your big files stored on Google Drive for your users. If you want to identify kind of how people are using space, that's another good one.
I like that one. So you need to share that with me, because I don't think I've got that one. I could probably work out what it is, but yeah, if you've got that, that would be handy to share.
It takes a long time to run on a big domain, but it's gives a lot of useful data afterwards.
And that's actually really useful for education users, because your data is pooled, because you've got that pool of 100 terabytes from memory of data.
Yep, that's
because
right.
You've got that pooled data storage. You'll want to find out where those big files are if you're beginning to head towards that limit.
Yeah, seeing as though Peter just brought this up, it's just we're working on putting together this Data Studio dashboard for schools. And what this will be, you'll take two reports. One is the apps usage on the admin console, and the second one, so this is where this data is coming from. So it's showing here the Drive usage, Gmail, and Photos usage of users. And the one that Peter was referencing is just down here. This pulls down all of your file usage on the domain. So for example, probably not surprisingly, all of these blue bars are represented by video. There's actually MP4. This one on the left is the size that's being used, and on the right, this is the number of files. So for example, you can see on the left here, this user, Jane's, using a huge amount of storage for video files, but on the right, if we're just counting the number of files, it's only about half of that storage, just over that. But yeah, we're putting together this template, but back to what Charlie and Peter were talking about. Again, this can all be done through GAM, and perhaps one of you gentlemen maybe look at scripting this so it would automatically run this report and update the data.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think Mohammed, you were just asking where can GAM be applied? It can be applied everywhere, really. It can do settings, reporting, huge amount of things.
Okay. I think if we haven't got any further questions coming through, I think we'll just move on to summing up, guys, and finishing up. So, I mean, hopefully you found that a bit useful today. You found a little bit more about GAM and about what it can do for you. We're happy to take further comments and things. If you want to make them in YouTube, you want to just post them there, that would be grand. You'll see there's some. We'll finish up and share some information with apps events in a moment. And anything else just to finish, guys? Anything else? Closing statement? Okay.
Yeah. So first of all, I would like to say.
Over to Veronica. Over to you, Veronica.
Yeah. Sorry. Just. First of all, I would like to say thank you, Peter, and thank you, Charlie, for joining us, for really interesting and useful information and a lot of input. So thank you so much. Also would like to say thank you for watching us. I mean, everyone, everywhere. Really, we are looking forward to meeting you again for our next summit. Charlie, I think we are running it in March. We will definitely post the date in advance, so feel free and really keep checking it and join us again. Thank you, James, for being here as well.
Just trying to understand what Charlie and Peter are talking about. Just trying to hang in there.
Yeah. Also,
thank you, everyone. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I think, Rosemary, I think you mentioned that would be useful on Drive. I think Rosemary was just referring to the storage report. Yeah, just to repeat, we're going to release this Data Studio report with instructions on how to use that on your domain. And I think we'll link in the instructions from Charlie about setting up GAM as well. I think that ties in very nicely there, in addition to what you've walked through today. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
thank
everyone.
you, everyone. Thank you.